President, I ask unanimous consent that if the motion to concur in the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 244 is agreed to, the Senate proceed to the consideration of H. Con. Res. 53, an enrollment correction to H.R. 244, that the resolution be agreed to and the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have come to the floor this afternoon to speak on the Omnibus Appropriations Bill that is now before the Senate. Will have an opportunity to vote on that very shortly here. And I'd like to take a few moments to explain why I intend to support this legislative measure. I support this bill because I think it's good for the country, and I believe it is good for my state of Alaska. I think what we have seen through this appropriations process is a negotiated bill going back and forth between both sides, between both bodies. And it is a bill that funds the federal government through the end of this fiscal year. It is far from perfect. I think we recognize that, but it's tough to find a legislation in any place where we're all going to be in agreement that it has everything that each of us wants. But I do believe that it is a solid bill. I think it's a solid bipartisan effort, and I would urge my colleagues to support this bill. The first thing it does is it prevents the government from shutting down. Simply put, there are very few things in my mind that would warrant a government shutdown. The people of this country expect us to govern. They don't expect us to come to work and say, we're going to shut it down. They expect us to figure out how we're going to fund it, to keep it open, to do so in a responsible way that allows for the priorities to be reflected. And I think we have done that. But I feel very strongly that those who would suggest that the way to deal with things is to shut it down is not the proper approach. And that's why I have supported Senator Portman's legislation to put an end to government shutdowns. We just don't need disruptions that ultimately hurt our economy and hurt our families. Now, I certainly would have preferred a process that would allow for funding the government by passing appropriations measures on an individual basis, one by one. My colleague on the floor here from Vermont has been around for a few Congresses, and he knows that that used to be the way that we handled appropriations. We had an approps bill come to the floor, we debated it, we amended it, we moved it through, we worked through that process. It was somewhat tediously slow at times, but it was a very open and collaborative process that I think reflected, again, the priorities around the country. What we have in front of us is a measure that did, in fact, go through the full appropriations process. All 12 appropriations bills made it through the committees. Sometimes not all of them do, but for FY17, these appropriations bills did. But as we saw at the end of last year, there was an agreement that we would not move forward with the appropriations bills at that time. Actually, it was probably less than an agreement, but a decision was made. And we are here as of May 4th, still working on FY17. This is clearly not the best option in my view in terms of how we handle our appropriations bills, but it's where we are right now. And the option that we have in front of us, in my view, is clearly the best option. Continuing resolutions are just not a way to operate. I think they're poor policy. Keeping funding at previous levels doesn't allow for Congress to have any input on any new priorities. In some cases, programs that receive more money than they may actually need at that time. And thus you have a situation where you're ending up wasting dollars rather than being good and efficient stewards of the taxpayer dollars. I think we saw that with this omnibus bill that we have in front of us now, it gave our new president the opportunity to weigh in. Clearly, we heard President Trump's priorities expressed not only throughout the campaign, but early in his new administration here, his priorities on national security, making sure that from a defense perspective and border security, these issues were addressed. And I think that we have done so in a responsible way on the defense side of spending, but also with a comprehensive approach to border security and utilizing new surveillance and new technologies. This bill consolidates or terminates dozens of existing programs and rejects unnecessary spending of tax dollars. It reduces spending in wasteful programs, eliminates unnecessary, ineffective, or duplicative programs. And again, I think what we have put together within this appropriations omnibus is a spending proposal that does apply the taxpayer dollars responsibly. Overall, the bill puts real dollars behind our nation's priorities by enhancing our national security, investing in education, infrastructure, and innovation, as well as improving the health and well-being of all Americans. And I'd like to take just a few moments here to speak specifically to some of the provisions that will be helpful in my state of Alaska. The omnibus bill sustains Alaska's contribution to our national defense, helps to protect our fisheries, address high energy costs, helps a very struggling timber industry in southeastern Alaska, and helps keep the federal government's commitment to Alaska natives. There are some programs that would appear to be pretty small, but in terms of consequence and impact on Alaska, they're quite significant. Essential air service, we provide for funding in this measure that helps maintain commercial air service to as many as 60 small communities in the state. The reason it's called essential air services, Madam President, is because in most of these communities, there is no other way to get to these smaller communities. There is no road access. There is no other way. You might be able to run a riverboat up, but in terms of ability to access, this essential air service is exactly that. The bill provides for new investment in the Coast Guard that will help increase safety in Alaska's waters. There's infrastructure improvements in Kodiak to support the home porting of offshore patrol cutters in the Arctic region, and funding for new cutters that we will see stationed throughout Alaska. A lot going on in the news right now with regards to Russia and North Korea, and it's certainly front and foremost for Alaskans. We've got our neighbors to the west of us there in Russia, and of course within range of anything that North Korea might consider. So there's a very keen interest and a desire to ensure that our nation is investing in our Pacific and our Arctic defense. This bill recognizes the issue, and it recognizes the strategic value that Alaska has. It provides $4.3 billion for procurement of F-35s, including some of those that will be based in the interior part of the state. We saw the need for the next generation of fighter jets in Alaska when just a few weeks ago we saw the Russian planes buzzing the coast for 4 days straight. Well, today's news re-ups that. F-22s intercepted 2 Russian Bear bombers, according to the news this morning, 50 miles southwest of Alaska. So again, when you're thinking about the investments that we make to provide for our nation's security, Alaska sits really at the center up there in terms of strategic location. There's also money for developing the long-range discrimination radar at Clear and funds for the ground-based missile defense at Fort Greely. Again, very significant at this time, given the geopolitics not too far from our state. Another key part of our Arctic defense strategy is finally being able to realize, after years of me kind of pounding on this drum, funding for Icebreaker. As of right now, we are woefully, woefully behind when it comes to our ability to maneuver in the Arctic regions in our waters. So there's $150 million in advanced procurement funding for an icebreaker that's in the DoD budget, and an additional $55 million in the Coast Guard budget. It is imperative, Madam President, that we move to fund a new icebreaker now. We also recognize the role that the Coast Guard plays in terms of national defense across the country, particularly in the Arctic. So the bill provides $1.3 billion in acquisition, construction, and improvement money. The Coast Guard needs to recapitalize its aging fleet, and we see this no more apparent than in Alaska. A ship that was built back in 1971 is still being used to patrol areas that are perhaps some of the roughest seas in the world. This is not smooth water sailing. Congress needs to recognize the role played by the Coast Guard not only in national defense, but in drug interdiction, fisheries patrol, safety encroachment, and we must give it the assets that it needs to do its job well. On the education front, this bill provides funds for our public schools, including money for programs that were authorized in ESSA, funds IDEA, Carl Perkins, Impact Aid, 21st Century Community Learning Centers. Especially important for us in Alaska are the programs like ANEP, Alaska Native Education Equity Program, strengthening Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian serving institutions, tribally controlled colleges and universities, and Indian education national activities. We've all come to the floor over the course of these past few months, this Congress, to talk about the impact on our communities of the opioid epidemic in this country. This bill helps to get money where it's needed to help fight this epidemic. Over $1 billion is provided to various programs and agencies to specifically address the problem. Over $600 million of that will go to SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, including $500 million for a new program that was created by the 21st Century Cures Act that we passed earlier last year. And we also see the CDC, Department of Justice, and VA that will see increased funding to help deal with this scourge of addiction. Madam Chairman, as chairman of the Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies Appropriations Subcommittee, the Division G of the Omnibus is of particular significance to me. The Interior Appropriations section probably has more impact on the state of Alaska than most would realize. It controls funding levels for the federal agencies and the departments that have a huge presence in my state, whether it's BLM, Forest Service, EPA, Fish and Wildlife, Indian Health Service, BIA, National Park Service. These are all within the auspices of the Interior. So some of the highlights within the Interior bill: this is the centennial year of the National Park Service, so we were able to do more to help address the maintenance backlog within our park system. The two agencies that deliver services for Indian communities, BIA and Indian Health Service, we did our best to support those programs that are critical to the Indian community, and for those agencies we have provided full contract support costs. We continue tribal court funding for those PL 280 states. We have really worked to do what we can within IHS to address these issues of suicide, domestic violence, alcohol, substance abuse programs. So making sure that we're doing right by providing for the support for our healthcare facilities is critically important. We also have oversight of the EPA within our jurisdiction. I've heard some criticism from some that we didn't do enough to reduce EPA spending, and then others saying you took too much from EPA. But what we really looked to try to do was to take a common sense approach, focus resources on the programs that do the concrete things to improve the quality of the environment for the public when it comes to clean air and clean water. And then effectively make sure that whether it is the WIFIA program, the state revolving funds for our water and our wastewater programs, making sure that we have the resources to do right by our communities in making sure that there's clean air, clean water, whether it's the airshed, targeted airshed grants program, which help communities deal with pollution issues, air issues. So I think that we did a fair job with the EPA budget, and I think, again, we have worked to reduce in areas where you're just staffing up for initiatives that, quite honestly, have been questioned or challenged, and making sure that we're focusing in on the priorities that deliver to EPA's mission, which is clean air, clean water. Madam President, the last thing that I would like to add here is what we were able to do with regards to wildfires, because this is an issue for so many of us in the West. We were able to include funding for wildland fire management programs to fully fund the 10-year average of suppression costs, as well as to allow for emergency funding in the event that we have a catastrophic wildfire season. I think we all understand the challenges that our agencies face when you have fire borrowing going back and forth. So this is an effort that we have long sought to address. We will continue to work on that. Madam President, it's been interesting to watch and to read the news about this omnibus. You have the president who said, this is good, this is what winning looks like. You have Democrats that have said, you know, we won. This isn't about a win for the Ds or a win for the Rs. This is about making sure that this is right for the country. And I would suggest that if both sides are taking credit, we must have hit the sweet spot somewhere here in the middle. And I think at this place that we are right now, over 7 months into this fiscal year, it is well past time that Congress pass a bill that funds the government for the balance of this fiscal year. These are uncertain times for the country, uncertain times certainly in my state, and I think they deserve some certainty from us. I think it's a good bill, and I think we owe it to the American people to not create unnecessary, unwanted drama about whether or not the federal government remains open for business. So I would urge my colleagues to support this measure. And with that, Mr. President, I thank you and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.